Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hi there, and welcome to episode 61 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back today for another case. Before we jump into today's episode, a few quick reminders. First off, you can check out the website at TheKillFile.com to submit a case you want me to cover or to find the merch site. Secondly, please take a second to rate, review, follow, or subscribe wherever you listen to get new episodes every Monday. And this is the best way to help out the podcast so others can find us. Finally, this fall, as you probably already know, I will be coming out with the bonus content called The Hidden Files, where you can just pay a few bucks a month for some extra episodes, and they will be a little different than what we cover here on the main podcast. These will be topics like natural disasters, assassinations, uprisings, and I'm hoping to get one started called Listener Files, where the listeners can write in about their own or someone they know's true crime stories, and I will share them on the podcast. I'm looking for anything from maybe a murder in the town that you grew up in that affected you or your town. Maybe it's even the reason that you got into true crime in the first place. Maybe your mom was a nurse and remembers treating a killer one time. Maybe your son is a cop and has a few good stories they have shared, or maybe you witnessed a gas station robbing and you want to share that experience with us. Email those to thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com with the subject line Listener Files. They can be short or long, and feel free to change any names or stay anonymous. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today we are going to talk about a case that is pretty famous, pretty well known, and it's pretty rough. But it's one that always hit me hard, and I wanted to learn more about it. We are going to be covering the murder of Polly Klaas. Trigger warnings for today are going to be murder of a minor and kidnapping. Brace yourself. Here we go. Today we're going to be heading to a place in California called Petaluma. Petaluma is located in Sonoma County, which is in the northern Bay Area of San Francisco. I don't know squat about California. I've only been to San Francisco and another smaller town, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. But from what I can see on a map, it looks to be a town nestled between San Francisco and Santa Rosa, for those of you who know the area. Petaluma was founded in 1852, and a few years later would become a city known for not only shipping and manufacturing, but also for being a quote-unquote poultry town, earning the nickname, according to the Petaluma Area Chamber of Commerce, quote, World's Egg Basket. During the 90s, a typical evening in Petaluma would consist of people going out to dinner, families spending time together, and kids of all ages could enjoy local places like the Phoenix Theater, Windsor Waterworks, or the roller rink called the Star Skate. With a population of approximately 45,000 people in this year of 1993, Petaluma may have had a safer, small-town feel for its residents until the incident that would change the city forever. On October 1st, 1993, Polly Klaas, a local 12-year-old girl, was having a sleepover with her two friends Kate and Jillian, when, according to Polly's father Mark Klaas, a parent's worst nightmare would take place. A little later, after 10:30 p.m., as Polly's mother, Eve, slept just down the hall, as well as Polly's sisters, sleeping in their own room, and the girls sleeping over were all hanging out in Polly's room, a man would enter the room. According to the two friends who were spending the night that night at Polly's, the man had a bushy beard and was holding a knife. The man then said to the girls, according to Polly's friends, quote, Nobody move or I'll slit your throat. The man then told the girls to be quiet and lay face down as he gagged and tied up Polly's two friends using ligatures that were made out of a Nintendo game box that had been in the room, and then he placed pillowcases over the girls' heads. This stranger then told the two girls to count to 1,000 and said that he was just going to take Polly to collect some of the family's valuables, and then he would bring her back. Then the man took Polly, and the girls heard the screen door shut with a bang. After this, the girls were able to untie themselves and wake up Polly's mom, who in turn called the police after initially thinking it was a prank. You can tell on the 911 phone call that Polly's mother doesn't seem to quite understand what's going on, but it's almost like the panic hasn't set in for her yet. After this, the authorities would put out an APB and a rough sketch on the man that later on would almost be a perfect match to the man who abducted Polly. One of the problems that we will later find out about this case is that while an all points bulletin was put out, it was actually not put out over certain radio signals, as the authorities were trying to keep it from the media that night. My guess is that maybe they were just afraid that the man who took Polly might find out that the authorities were looking for him and then hurt or possibly kill Polly. But this is just conjecture on my part, though. I have no idea. But we do know that the authorities were trying to keep this kidnapping out of the media that night for whatever reason. The authorities immediately contacted the FBI about the kidnapping, and the FBI would exhaust all of their resources and newest technologies to help in this case. According to an ABC News article, the FBI would use what at the time was the state-of-the-art technology in the investigation, collecting fibers from clothing, fingerprints, and other resources. A now retired FBI special agent on this case named Eddie Freyer told ABC that they put everything they had into this case. As Polly's two friends were taken in for questioning about exactly what happened that night, it seems like because not much was coming out of the kidnapping investigation in the beginning, that many law enforcement agents were starting to think that the kidnapping may not have occurred at all that night. There was a theory that was coming forward and seemed to gain at least a little traction in the mind of the investigators that maybe Polly left with a secret boyfriend and that her two friends were just covering for her. In fact, a quote from one of the Petaluma police officers at the time would say, according to the LA Times article, quote, "This is bullshit. It never happened," end quote. It seemed at the time the authorities were sort of fixating on the little things that differed between the two young girls who witnessed Polly's kidnapping. For example, one girl remembered the man wearing a yellow headband, but the other didn't remember that. And one girl heard the door slam, but the other didn't remember that. This went so far that they gave the two girls polygraphs at the time, and one passed and one was deemed inconclusive. Eventually, as the interviewers were told to lean on these two girls as they would a suspect, in fact, they were actually threatened with juvie if they didn't quote-unquote come clean about what really happened. The authorities also told the girls that they were really hurting Polly's parents. The girls would eventually clam up and didn't want to talk anymore. First off, I'm going to tell you right now that the girls did not make this up. Polly was abducted, and as much as I understand wanting to make sure that the narrative that these two young girls are telling you is in fact the truth, quote-unquote leaning on these two girls is absolutely not the way to have gone about that, and eventually, FBI Special Agent Freyer would travel the country and lecture on the importance of specialists' training when it comes to interviewing children witnesses and how they should be non-threatening when asking them questions. It almost makes me wonder if the police involved in this case were looking for anything to grab onto other than a random man broke into a home and took a child directly out of her own bedroom in front of witnesses because it was scary to think that that might be the case. But guess what? It was. As word spread about the kidnapping and disappearance of Polly Klaas, this story would quickly make national news. Thousands of tips would come in regarding the case, but the authorities had absolutely nothing to go on, which must have just been so terrifying for everyone in the area and Polly's parents. Volunteers came out in search of Polly, combing the woods around the Klaas's home, and one source would even say that psychics showed up offering their services. One officer would say that people from all over the place were wanting to attach themselves to this case because it was so huge and because of its national status. He further said people would show up trying to get a quote-unquote reading. Gross. I hate hearing when people try to inject themselves into cases for this crap, and especially when they give the parents or loved ones hope, and it, of course, turns out that it's all wrong. I've heard a few cases where someone was pretty damn close, and they have used psychics on cases, but I'm a huge skeptic, but again, that's just me. This case became so big, even actress Winona Ryder offered a $200,000 reward for information that was related to finding Polly Klaas, just wanting to spread the awareness of this case. Mark Klaas would say that he felt that the media and news outlets needed to keep the pressure on the investigation so that they wouldn't step away from the case. Mark Klaas, which is Polly's father, who at the time had already divorced her mother, was obviously devastated by what happened, and he also said that he held on to the hope that they were going to find his daughter. The disappearance of Polly had now stretched into its second month, as people were still very invested in finding Polly. Mark would say, according to an ABC 7 news segment called Struck by Justice, The Impact of Polly Klaas, that during the first 2 months he felt he was, quote, completely dominated by fear, anger, and at the same time, ironically, hope." End quote. I always think about this when it comes to cases like this where someone disappears, especially a child, where the parents must be going through turmoil not knowing what happened to their child and whether they're alive or not. Like, you must just go back and forth all over the place with like worst case scenarios, but also like wanting to hang on to the hope, because it does happen sometimes that they find the kids and they're safely returned, although it's rare. Also, how do you go back to your regular life when something like this happens? It's one of the biggest questions I wonder all the time. Like, how do you go through something like this and then eventually have to go back to work, right? Because you still have to pay your bills and eat and stuff, especially if you have other children. But how can anyone expect you to show up to work, let's say like 2 weeks or whatever, after your child has gone missing and is still missing? How do you focus on work, or do you even? It's a nightmare situation in my head that I wonder about. This next part is taken from a real crime video that was released and had interviewed some of the investigators on the case and had also told the story of what happened the night Polly disappeared. It was one of those old-fashioned videos that was reenacted to show the events, and it just brought me right back to my youth, seeing things like this from time to time. So, on the night of Polly's abduction, about 25 miles from Polly's home, 2 women would be having a strange experience as well. A woman named Dana Haffey, who lived in Santa Rosa, had been out that evening, and after returning home to her daughter and saying goodbye to her babysitter Shannon, the evening would turn out to not be what either of these women were expecting. Dana and Shannon would encounter a trespasser on Dana's property. Dana recalled the night the trespasser was there, her babysitter Shannon Lynch was leaving Dana's home and was driving down what was said to be a long driveway when she saw a man walking down the middle of the driveway, and his Pinto was parked not far from him. The man approached Shannon's car and said that he was stuck, and then he insisted that she get out of her own car and help him. He was also asking Shannon what was up the driveway that they were on. Shannon would describe this stranger as looking like a quote-unquote wild man and sensed immediately that there was something not right about him and the situation. She left the man on the driveway and drove quickly to the nearest phone that she could get to, which ended up being a payphone about 2 miles down the road. She called Dana, and she wanted to warn her of this man that she thought of as scary, who was trespassing onto her driveway and her property. Dana did the smart thing and grabbed her daughter and got the hell out of the house and drove down the hill, having grabbed a baseball bat for protection. Smart woman, but also, call the police before you do that. I would have been so scared to know that I have to drive down the driveway past this guy. I think I would have also grabbed, a kitchen knife. Dana saw the vehicle pulled over to the side of the driveway, but didn't see the man anywhere. Oh, the terror. Shit. What's worse, is seeing the crazed man or not? Ugh. Dana then drove into town and called the police. A few minutes after midnight, 2 deputies from Sonoma County showed up to take a look at what was going on. Dana told the deputies she didn't necessarily need the man arrested for trespassing, but she just really wanted to get him off of her property. The deputies thought the trespasser was a little irritated, and the deputies were able to smell alcohol on the man's breath. The deputies also took note that the man had some leaves and debris in his hair, as if he had been laying or rolling around in the trees or on the ground. He told the deputies that he was just out sightseeing, and then realized accidentally that he was on private property. Yeah, right. Sightseeing? What the fuck? That's the best you can do. He then told the deputies that he was trying to turn his car around when he actually got stuck in the ditch. And then he said that he was underneath the car trying to free it. But the deputies knew that this wasn't true because there wasn't enough room for a person to get up underneath the car the way that it was stuck. So then the deputies gave the man a few roadside tests to see if he was drunk, but he passed all of them. Inside the car, they could see a small duffel bag in the back seat, some beer cans, and a plastic bag. When the deputies asked the man if he had been drinking these beers, the man grabbed one, opened it, and started drinking it. Who does that? The deputies immediately told him to pour it out, and then proceeded to pat the man down. The man became visibly upset. So, this is when the deputies said, "Hey, look, we are within our rights to bring you in for trespassing." And it seemed to calm the man down quite a bit. The deputies then searched him and questioned him, but the deputies didn't find anything incriminating. This was just a weird and suspicious situation to the deputies, but they had nothing on him. Even when they ran his license, the man's driving record was clean. The deputies had been holding him for about 45 minutes already, and they needed to legally let him go. So, They helped him get his car out of the ditch, and then they let the man go on his way. 2 months later, Dana would be walking along her property when she would find some specific and frightening items that she would call the police about. A hood, binding, and girls' tights were found on Dana's property, and when the authorities came to check them out, this is when Dana would tell the story of the strange man her and her babysitter had encountered about 2 months ago. It's worth noting that the tights had been tied in a knot. As the authorities were standing on the hillside, wondering if this was going to be Polly's crime scene, it was getting foggy and misty and started raining. They both knew in their hearts that this was going to be a crime scene and bring resolution to that case. 300 people came out to search the mountain, including 25 to 30 search dogs. They believed at this point that she was still alive. They now got the full details on what happened on Dana's property. When they reran the man's information and background, they would realize this man was Richard Allen Davis, and he had some serious red flags on his background, including kidnapping cases and assault with a deadly weapon. He was capable of being involved in Polly's case. The picture of the man matched the sketch from the two friends of Polly's, and it turned out that Davis's mother also lived in Petaluma, which could be the reason that Davis was in the area of Polly's house in the first place. The authorities then figured out that there was a warrant on Davis for breaking parole and a DUI, and this is when they would go looking for him. After Davis was brought in, Polly's two friends, Kate and Jillian, that were both there that night, picked him out of a lineup, even though he had shaved his beard. Most likely because he saw the sketch of himself everywhere in the news, but that's just my conjecture. Davis had been living in a halfway house, applied for an overnight pass so that he could visit his mother who lived in the Petaluma area. For whatever reason, Davis would say that he wasn't able to find his mother's house. Okay. So he just started wandering around and had been walking in Polly's neighborhood having a few beers. He then said he was stopped by a guy on the street who asked him if he wanted to buy some weed, so Davis said he bought a joint off the guy. This is when he really started feeling his buzz. Davis then said he decided to go to the store and get some more beer, but he must have been too fucked up already because he said at some point he was just walking around aimlessly. If this is believed to be the truth. The reason that I think he's full of shit is because, according to the Real Crime video, Davis came to Polly's neighborhood seemingly prepared for whatever he was about to do because in his vehicle, there were packed tape and bindings. He essentially had a kidnapping kit ready to go. Forensic investigators actually knew that Davis had cut the strips or bindings with scissors himself, which later on would show intent in Polly's case. Davis then confessed that he picked a quote-unquote random house and proceeded to crawl into an open window. Always lock your doors and windows at night. Not blaming anyone, because back then it was a lot different, but I am telling you all, my listeners, I don't care how nice of an evening it is or how much you want the fresh, cold air at night. It's not worth your life. So lock your windows and get a fan. I promise it's worth it. Okay, moving on. Davis would also admit that he heard the TV on and grabbed a knife from the kitchen of the home and then said classically that he doesn't remember anything after this moment. Bullshit, you fucking monster. Own what you did. Davis then said the next thing he remembers is driving in his car and he found himself surprised that next to him in the car was a young girl. Davis said that the girl was upset and her hands were tingling, seemingly from the bindings being too tight, so he claimed to have taken time to adjust the bindings for her. Davis then claims that he just kept driving, wondering to himself what he had just done and what he was going to do now. Bullshit. Davis then drove off the main road, and this is when he got his Pinto stuck seemingly on Dana's driveway. Davis says he then realized that the car was very stuck, and he said it in a way that like he realized that he wasn't going to be able to get out of it. So he said he then picked Polly up out of the car and proceeded to carry her up a steep slope that he estimated was about 30 yards away from the car. Davis then claimed he planned to leave Polly there in the dark and alone until he figured out how to free his Pinto. Bullshit. Also, I'm going to note here that no one believes his story about how he left Polly on the hillside. The authorities believe that when the deputies came up to him that he had probably just strangled Polly to death and was headed back out of the wooded area. However, Davis would claim that after the deputies left, he waited 15 or 30 minutes and went back to Polly, who was waiting for him. Bullshit. He then said he got back into his car and drove around a little longer, with Davis confessing he realized he needed to get rid of her. So something of note here is, first of all, if she was left alone, I would love to believe that Polly would have taken off running. She was probably a fighter and probably wouldn't have just sat there waiting for whatever was about to happen to her. And secondly, authorities believed that Davis may have actually already seen Polly, like at a local park or around the neighborhood, and this is why he decided to go into her home that evening. So you might be wondering, if an APB had been put out about the kidnapping of Polly Klaas, then why didn't the deputies connect the dots and at least bring the man in, right? Well, it turns out that the announcement, or APB, was just going out as the officers had been talking and dealing with Davis. And to top it off, they were tuned into a different radio channel, so either way, they would not have been able to hear about the bulletin for the kidnapping. Remember me saying that the authorities didn't broadcast it on every channel because they were afraid of the media getting wind of it? Yeah, so the deputies 25 miles away didn't know anything about the 12-year-old girl who had been taken or the description of the suspect, unfortunately. Also, the deputies didn't let the authorities know about the strange encounter with the man in the Pinto in relation to Polly's case because I guess they just didn't think it was connected. After the dots were connected that this encounter was the man who killed Polly, FBI Special Agent Freyer says that had they known about the weird deputy encounter with Davis, it could have saved them a lot of grief, seemingly meaning that everything that they had to do to find Polly and figure out what happened to her. But he doesn't feel like it would have changed the outcome of what had happened to poor Polly. Another thing of note is that when the deputies ran Davis's driver's license that night that they encountered him, the technology at the time was only able to give them a read on his license and driving history, not his actual criminal history, which, of course, could have made this go a little different, but, again, authorities believe this was after the fact. Eventually, Davis would confess to strangling the 12-year-old Polly Klaas to death. So let's talk real quick about Richard Allen Davis and why he was able to even be in the area of Polly's house on the night that he decided to take the 12-year-old girl and strangle her to death. According to a People magazine article about this case, Davis's mother, Evelyn White, had abandoned her children, leaving them to be raised by their alcoholic father in a La Handra trailer park, which was located about 45 miles to the south of San Francisco. During the penalty phase of his trial, Davis's younger sister Darlene would testify that their father would regularly beat the children, but most often it seemed to focus on Davis. Darlene would also testify that on one occasion their father almost broke Davis's jaw, and on another occasion he threw Davis through a wall made of sheetrock. When Davis's mother was in the picture, she apparently was no saint. According to an article in SF Gate, on 2 separate occasions, it was witnessed that she had held Davis's hand, as a child, over an open flame as a form of punishment. It was said that Davis would stand there, quote-unquote, stoic, as blisters formed from the flames. It seems Davis would start his criminal career rather early, as he was known to steal checks out of people's mailboxes when he was just 12 years old. That's so young to start being a shitbag. All I can say is that there's a lot of people out there who have been abused as children who don't end up doing shit like Richard Allen Davis does. Eventually, Davis would move on to more serious crimes like grand theft, burglary, assault with a deadly weapon, and kidnapping. And this would include multiple arrests, multiple sentencings, and early paroles, as well as charges for violating those parole terms. In Oakland, California in the year 1976, Davis had actually kidnapped a young woman named Frances Mays, who was a 26-year-old legal secretary, according to an article in SF Gate. Davis took her and attempted to sexually assault the woman, but she was able to escape, and all of this was at knife point. Early December of the same year, Davis admittedly faked a suicide attempt to get transferred to a state hospital where he knew that it would be easier to escape, and sadly, he was right. By mistake, Davis was put in as a voluntary patient rather than a prisoner who had to be there, so he left. He then, a week later, decided to go on a crime spree that would last 4 days, and would include beating a woman with a fire poker while she slept, after having broken in. This woman was a nurse at the state hospital named Marjorie Mitchell. Davis then proceeded to break into Napa County's animal shelter where he stole a shotgun. I would love to know how he was able to do this. While still in possession of this shotgun, he attempted to kidnap a woman named Hazel Front, who at the time was working as a bartender. David and Hazel got into her Cadillac that was outside of the bar that she worked at. This woman is a badass. Get this. When she realized that this fucking creep had bindings with him, she fucking rolled out of her car, grabbed her gun from under her seat, and then she fucking fired 6 shots at Davis as he was running away. Yes, girl, good for you. You probably saved your own life. Then in the same month, Davis broke into a home of a bank employee named Josephine Krieger, and this was in La Honda. He was arrested after the break-in because a deputy would find this fucker hiding behind some bushes behind Josephine's home, holding a damn shotgun. In June of the next year, so 1977, Davis was sentenced to 25 years in prison for when he had kidnapped Frances May, and the crazy thing was that a charge of sexual assault was dropped as part of his plea bargain. This is what I had been wondering the whole time, like, why in the hell was he trying to kidnap these women? It had to be for a sexual reason, right? Of course it is. It always is. In 1984, he kidnapped yet another woman, but this time it was at gunpoint from her own home and apartment in Redwood City. Davis then forced the poor woman to take $6,000 out of her own bank account. For this, he would be sentenced to 16 years, but of course he was paroled early, just a few months before he killed Polly. It's also worth noting here that there's a 20-year-old case of a woman that was friends with Davis named Marlene Voris that allegedly committed suicide. However, there's speculation that Davis might have, in fact, allegedly, had been the one who ended her life. Marlene was about to go in the Navy, and before she was leaving, she threw a party at her parents' house as sort of a send-off. When the party ended, that's when Marlene was found dead from an apparent shotgun wound, and it was reported that there was no less than 7 different suicide notes found as well. And among the last few people to see her alive, well, good old Mr. Davis, of course. Some people connected to this incident believe it was absolutely Davis who killed Marlene. About this, Davis would actually say that Marlene shot herself, quote-unquote, almost in his presence, whatever the fuck that means, and that he was traumatized by it. Richard Allen Davis would eventually show the authorities where he left Polly's body, and even though it was nighttime, the authorities didn't want to wait. Davis brought them to a field, and under some boards, they would find the body of 12-year-old Polly Klaas. 1996, the trial of Davis would commence, with the defense not arguing that Davis was guilty of the murder, but they really focused on saying that he did not sexually assault Polly. The jury would find him guilty of at least 10 felony crimes, and one of them was attempting lewd acts with a minor. There wasn't a sexual assault or rape conviction or charge because Polly's autopsy on the subject of a possible sexual assault came back as inconclusive. During the time that Davis was allowed to address the court, it was said that he began with a ton of complaints about the legal system, and I'm sure no one gave 2 shits about that. But then he decided to give one last fuck you seemingly to Klaas's family by saying the following, quote, "The main reason I know I did not attempt any lewd act that night was because of the statement the young girl made to me while walking up the embankment. Just don't do me like my dad." End quote. What a fucking piece of shit, trying to imply that Polly's father had been molesting her. I remember hearing audio from the courtroom on this as people gasped when he said it. Right after this comment, Mark Klaas jumped to his feet and started towards Davis saying, quote, "You fucker," end quote. Then a deputy grabbed Mark Klaas and started taking him out of the courtroom as Mark was still shouting. Understandably, oh my God, can you imagine? This motherfucker taking your 12-year-old innocent daughter's life in a horrific way, and then saying something like that just to smear you and twist the knife that's already in you? Ugh. I say let the parents of the children have 30 minutes in a room with the bastard who takes their children's lives. Eye for a fucking eye. He's so fucking gross. I believe it was after this that the judge gave Davis the death penalty and had a comment of his own saying, quote, "Mr. Davis, this is always a traumatic and emotional decision for a judge. You made it very easy today by your conduct." End quote. Davis was indeed given the death sentence, but this is not quite the end of the story. Polly's case would be the push that legislation needed to pass something that had been proposed just 1 year earlier by another grieving father, but had been shut down. Michael Reynolds, the father of Kimber Reynolds, who had been shot and killed in 1992 during an armed robbery, submitted a bill in which he proposed the law that would eventually be known as the 3 Strikes Law. This law would be pushed through by California legislature, and then 24 states would follow suit within 1 year. The three strikes law would be if a felon commits another violent felony, then their sentence would double. And if they committed a third violent felony, then their penalty for the crime would be 25 years to life. Basically a 3 strikes and you're out law. But when it was first proposed, this was to focus on violent crimes, not just 3 crimes. Because there was so much public outrage about the Polly Klaas case, and that Polly was just one in a string of missing children in the past decade, the public was sick and tired of the rampant crime and wanted something done. Not only was the public so involved in Polly's case because the community came together when it happened to help, but also Mark Klaas would go on to become a huge advocate for the 3 strikes law and other laws like Megan's Law. But he also started something called Klaas Kids Foundation, which was a nonprofit organization that tried to protect children. Sadly, the Klaas Kids Foundation would shut its doors in 2024. So real quick, Megan's Law has to do with the public being notified about registered sex offenders. I remember when I learned about the different laws like Megan's Law or the Amber Alert, it never really dawned on me that these became a thing after some little girl was most likely killed, then the laws were changed. I hate that something has to happen before real action is taken. Like, why doesn't common sense precede these things happening? During talks of the 3 strikes law being set in motion, President Bill Clinton invited Mark Klaas to the White House, and this was for the push that Clinton also wanted on stricter laws for a crime crackdown. But sources said it was Mark Klaas that was the one who convinced President Clinton to add the 3 strikes law to his policies. At the time, then Senator Joe Biden was also one of the main senators who backed this tough-on-crime bill, and when Congress passed it, Mark Klaas got to be there right next to President Bill Clinton when he signed it. Now, the Tough on Crimes bill helped in numerous ways with the rampant crime in areas, and it also paid out $10 billion in new prisons and added $100,000 for new police as well. They weren't kidding around, but the problems came with the types of crimes that were being used for the 3 strikes law. Remember when I said that when it was first proposed that these were supposed to be for violent offenders? Well, that's not exactly what happened. You see, just 2 years after the bill was approved, there was an estimated 192 people serving life sentences for possession of weed, which is absolutely fucking insane. This law was not meant for people who deal drugs or anything like that. It was supposed to be for violent criminals. There was said to be people who were serving life for possession charges, but that murderers weren't even serving life. During the time of the 192 in for life, and this was without the chance of parole, by the way, only 40 were in prison with the 3 strikes law for murder, 25 people in for life for rape, and another 24 were in for kidnapping. So the latter of the murder and kidnapping, etc., should absolutely be there for life with no parole because they deserve it. But the people in for possession? That's just dumb. It's like an overcorrection was implemented. After this, there was a proposition that came forward from the fallout of the 3 strikes law that would make this law only in effect for violent criminals. In fact, Polly's own grandfather was on the commercial for Proposition 66. However, at the time, then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger had also had a commercial trying to keep the law the way it was, and of course, the proposition then failed. So now you have completely overcrowded prisons to the point where they had to put bunks up in the middle of the Gen Pop floors just to fit everyone in, and this was a real problem. Thankfully, in 2012, the voters would enact a reform of the law, Proposition 36, which would eliminate the life sentences for non-violent or non-serious crimes, and it also helped offenders who were already sentenced to life on a minor 3rd strike to be able to get a reduced sentence, but only if the court found that the prisoner no longer possesses a threat to public safety. They saved these for people they actually thought were or could be rehabilitated. Thankfully, Richard Allen Davis was not someone who could be rehabilitated. However, in 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom was said to have invited Mark Klaas to Sacramento to have a conversation with him. Mark would say that this conversation didn't really have any substance to it, but the very next day, Governor Newsom would announce the moratorium on executions. Moratorium means like temporarily prohibiting something. Basically, they took back the death sentence, if I understand correctly. Mark said that he felt completely used and felt like the governor had only invited him to talk so that he could say to the public that he talked to the parents of cases like Polly Klaas before he announced the moratorium. So it would look like he was basically doing the right thing by trying to talk to people most affected by this, and maybe even pretending that they were all right with this. Who knows? Mark Klaas, of course, was not all right with this. In fact, he had been pretty outspoken about the fact that he wanted to see Davis given the death penalty for what he did to his daughter. Now he worries he won't live to see that day come. Polly's two sisters, Annie and Jess, at the time of Polly's death, were 6 and 12. They've committed themselves to undoing the tough legislation that came from their family's legacy and loss. Annie and Jess say that they each remember different things about what happened after Polly was taken, including people wearing quote-unquote Polly We Love You t-shirts and a visit by Winona Ryder, who had grown up in Petaluma. Annie specifically remembers an officer holding her little hand to the wall of the building where Davis was being incarcerated, and the officer said how thick the walls of the building were and then asked her in a reassuring way if she felt safe. I cannot imagine what these two young girls went through losing their sister at such young ages. The sisters would tell The Guardian in an article, quote, "There's the trauma of losing Polly, and then there's the trauma of how her death was used to punish other people." End quote. And that, my friends, is the story of little Polly Klaas, whose life was taken for absolutely no reason and way before her time, and a system that failed Polly as well. This fucking guy, am I right? He's a special kind of asshole to say something like that in court in front of Polly's family and the media, right? Like, it's bad enough that you took their daughter away from them in a horrific manner and snatched her from her own home during her own slumber party, you prick. But then to spit this vile remark out in court, ugh. I remember hearing in the clip a woman cry out, and there was audible gasps everywhere. It was so fucked up. This is really the case that sparked so much controversy when it came to the 3 strikes law and people generally being afraid for their children's safety. I feel like this was one of the first, at least in this area, times where people started realizing that children could be snatched from anywhere. I cannot fucking imagine. I'm scared now in 2025, let alone back then when there was no surveillance and no cell phones. So incredibly sad, and for absolutely no reason. I swear to God, how many of these cases are these innocent women and children who are slaughtered or just taken for some guy just trying to get his fucking jollies? It's disgusting, and I think women need to band together to stop this shit and rise up and take our power back. Power over ourselves, power overcoming shit that we shouldn't even have to go through. It is high time, but that's just my opinion. Okay, well, I hope to see you guys back next week for another episode here on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help The Kill File and other true crime lovers find us. Also, check out the website at thekillfile.com to suggest a case. Find our merch shop for fun Kill File gear, which you can also find at thekillfile.printify.me and help support the podcast. Have a suggestion or want to share your own true crime stories? Email thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com for a chance to get them read on the podcast. Follow The Kill File on your favorite social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, X, Blue X, TikTok, and of course, you can subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. We are either listed as The Kill File or The Kill File Podcast. Come on back Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case here on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.